We tend to think of history as, well, settled, like it's all carved in stone and that's that. But what if a single question could just blow all that up? That's what we're diving into today with the Silla-Tang War. It's a conflict from the 7th century that, believe it or not, might have been way bigger and way more important than what you'll find in most history books.
So let's just jump right in with a pretty wild idea. What if one of the defining wars in Korean history didn't actually happen in Korea? What if it was fought deep inside mainland China? I mean, think about that for a second. That's an idea that could completely flip everything we thought we knew about ancient East Asia on its head.
Okay, so this war, the Silla-Tang War, it went on from 670 to 676 AD. And let's be clear, this was no small border dispute. The records actually call it a war for hegemony, a knockdown, drag-out fight for who was going to be the top dog in East Asia. You had the Tang Dynasty of China, the absolute superpower of the day, going up against its old ally, the Kingdom of Silla, which was, a lot smaller.
All right, and this is where things get really interesting. The whole mystery, the whole controversy, it all comes down to one basic question. Where did this war actually take place? And the answer to that, well, it completely changes depending on which map you're looking at.
So, you've got these two totally different theories. On one hand, you have the textbook version, a defensive war, fought right there on the Korean Peninsula. Pretty straightforward. But then, you've got this other, much more radical idea called the Continental theory. It says, nope, the major battles were actually fought deep inside China. And if that's true, it changes everything. It's not a war for survival anymore. It's a huge offensive to grab power on the continent itself. And this leads to a pretty big question, a real logistical nightmare, actually. The Tang Dynasty sent an army of 200,000 troops. I mean, how on earth do you supply that many soldiers across the sea to fight in another country? People who support the Continental theory say, you probably can't. It's just not feasible. They argue it makes way more sense that the war was fought where that massive army already was, on the Chinese mainland. So Silla is facing down this absolute superpower. They know they can't do it alone, so they do something pretty incredible. They team up with their old enemies. This wasn't just Silla's fight anymore. It became a grand alliance, forged from the ashes of the kingdoms they had just recently conquered. So let's look at the players. On the Silla side, you've got King Munmu, a seriously brilliant strategist backed by legends like General Kim Il-sung. And on the Tang side, you've got Emperor Gaozong himself, with his best generals Xue Rengui and Li Jin-sing leading the charge. This was a true clash of the titans, no doubt about it, and the fate of an entire continent was on the line. And the sheer scale of this invasion, it's just mind-boggling. We're talking 200,000 troops. General Li Jin-sing was leading this combined force of Tang soldiers and their allies, the Mongol mercenaries. Make no mistake, this army had one goal and one goal only, to completely wipe Silla off the map.
But Silla wasn't just going to sit around and wait. No way. They went on the offensive, launching these bold, preemptive strikes. They hit Tang territory hard, and they retook 82 castles in what the records call former Baekje territory. Now, if you believe the continental view, this wasn't happening on the peninsula. This was a full-blown campaign to grab land right inside China in the Shandong and Jiangsu provinces.
So all of this builds up to the absolute climax of the war, between 675 and 676. It all came down to two epic showdowns, one massive battle on land and another one at sea. These two battles would decide everything. First up, the Battle of Meisong-seong. This is where that massive 200,000-man Tang army, mostly cavalry, made their big play to end the war. Now, the Continental theory says this fortress wasn't in Korea at all. It was on a huge plain in northern China. The perfect terrain for a massive clash of cavalry. So the big question is, how did Silla's smaller army possibly pull this off? Well, their strategy was just brilliant. Instead of a direct fight, which they would have lost, they played it smart. First, they baited the huge Tang army into a trap. Then, they started hitting their supply lines with guerrilla attacks. And finally, when the Tang forces were hungry, tired, and totally disorganized, Silla launched a massive, devastating surprise attack. And the result? It was absolutely staggering. Silla captured more than 30,000 war horses. Just let that number sink in for a moment. They didn't just beat the Tang army, they captured its main weapon.
The Tang cavalry was the most feared military force in all of Asia, and it was basically wiped out in one single battle.
Okay, so with the Tang land army completely crippled, the fight shifted to the sea. The Battle of Gyeongpo in 676 was the Tang's last-ditch effort. It was a final, desperate move to land troops and save what was left of their invasion. This was all about controlling the Yellow Sea.
And here we go again. The location changes the entire story. The standard view says this battle happened at the mouth of a Korean river, which makes it a defensive move. But the continental theory? It places the battle at the mouth of the Yangtze River, one of the most critical trade routes on the entire planet. So the stakes weren't just about defending a coastline. We're talking about seizing control of a vital global economic artery. So, against all odds, Silla won. This alliance of smaller kingdoms, people who had just been fighting each other, they stood up to the biggest superpower in the world and beat them, decisively. The question is, how on earth was that even possible?
Well, the numbers alone tell a pretty brutal story for the Tang Dynasty. They lost something like 87,000 soldiers. That's almost 3 times the losses of the Silla alliance. This wasn't just a bad day at the office. These were absolutely catastrophic losses for the empire. It really boils down to 3 key things that led to this incredible upset. First, you had this amazing unity. The people from the 3 old Korean kingdoms, Silla, Goguryeo, and Baekje, they put their old fights aside to face a common enemy. Second was technology. Silla had this powerful crossbow, the Cheonbono, that could supposedly punch right through the Tang cavalry's heavy armor. And third, and this is a big one, geopolitics. The Tang Empire was stretched thin, fighting a 2-front war. While they were dealing with Silla in the east, they were also battling the powerful Tibetan Empire in the west. Their resources were just stretched to the breaking point.
So, what's the big takeaway here? What does it all mean? Well, if that continental theory is right, then the legacy of this war is so much bigger than just the unification of the Korean Peninsula. It's a whole different story. What you get isn't just a unified peninsula, it's the birth of a massive continental maritime empire. Silla didn't just fight for its independence and then go home, it held on to important territory and influence right there on the Chinese mainland, controlling key ports and trade routes. It became a genuine power player on the world stage. And this whole idea is just perfectly summed up in the final wish of the victorious King Munmu. He asked that after he died, his ashes be scattered at sea in what he called the Whales Rapids. Now, according to the records, this wasn't just some poetic, sentimental thing. It was a powerful declaration. He was vowing to become a great sea dragon to forever protect his enormous maritime empire. And that really leaves us with one final big question to chew on. Was King Munmu just a patriotic king defending his small homeland on the peninsula, or was he a triumphant emperor laying his claim to an entire ocean and a piece of the continent? Depending on how you answer that, you don't just redefine an empire, you might just have to rewrite history itself.